All right, guys, welcome to Streatery Ahead, a discussion with several practitioners across the United States in the Placemaking US and Placemaking X network. My name is Ryan Smolar, and I'm with Placemaking US. I have Ethan Kent here with me from Placemaking X, and Madeline Spencer helping me out from Placemaking US, and my co-pilot at the Downtown Santa Ana Business Improvement District. We're going to be joined today by several practitioners across the US who've been experimenting with opening up sidewalks, promenades, plazas, partial street closures, full street closures for dining and as a lifeline to restaurants during COVID. And so we've got some amazing practitioners here. Madeline and I will be sharing with some of the stuff we've been experiencing in Santa Ana, California. You have Cheryl Muriente from West Palm Beach DDA, downtown West Palm Beach, that's done a beautiful dine out program. Alan Pullman from Studio 111 Architects, who's been working with the city of Long Beach on rolling out flex zones and a whole strategy around outdoor dining and activation. Jason Roberts from A Better Block, who has been building modular, very cool, open source street furniture for years and is under a storm of opportunity right now as many people seek the ideas that he's been presenting for years as immediately necessary solutions being widely implemented. Alex Sasayama is here from NeighborWorks America to really speak about, to take a moment and speak more broadly about what we're seeing. You know, we see a lot of energy right now with the restaurants sort of leading the pack outdoors, but we don't want to leave everybody else behind. And I think we're waking up a bigger and broader discussion as these dynamic between private public spaces and activation and permitting changes very quickly. And then hopefully Robin Abad Acubio from the City of San Francisco Planning Department, who's heading up their efforts there to create a strategy for outdoor dining activation, will be joining us towards the end, but he's on several deadlines, as you can imagine. So we're hoping he's going to be able to sneak away and speak with us. Before we kick into some of the localities, Ethan, did you want to say hi and talk about some of the broader things you're seeing as you talk to people here and around the world?
Thanks, Ryan. And you know, what a great group we have. Eager to hear from everybody. I think we have a really dream team of people figuring this out. You know, people that have been working at this for a long time, and just want to sort of reflect, you know, quickly on the sort of the larger trajectory for the placemaking movement here, because in many ways, the placemaking movement sort of emerged out of efforts to get food, cafes, street food vendors into public spaces, into streets again, and it's frankly struggled. We've struggled for decades to get allow the regulations to be loosened to allow this kind of innovation to occur. And so this is a ripe opportunity, but there's also, things I think we need to be wary of. Any change in public spaces in the process through which they're shaped can lead to further forms of privatization. But I'm very optimistic though about some of the solutions I'm seeing, especially from this group. Obviously, people like Jason Roberts have actually unlocked this in lots of ways in the past, and now are bringing new ideas that are being spreading more broadly. But just sort of a few quotes I wanted to sort of kick us off with. It just quickly came to mind that William White, who was sort of the mentor of Project for Public Spaces, and my father, he said, if you want to seed a place, put out food. It's as simple as that. And we have an opportunity to reseed places, and seed local food systems and local food economies again. But then Jane Jacobs also talked about how we seed cities, and it's actually, she says, lively, diverse, intense cities contain the seeds of their own regeneration, with energy enough to carry over for problems and needs outside of themselves. So obviously this is building on the assets that are there, drawing them out further, and building that resilience. But I think we want to make sure that that we see how cities can be open and porous, and that made me think of Saskia Sassen, who at one of our Future of Places conferences a few years ago said that the city has long been complex but incomplete. And a mix of complexity and incompleteness lies the possibility for those without power to make history, to make culture, to make an economy. So how we allow the existing businesses, but also new businesses to emerge in shaping their local economies again. How do we allow these vendors, street vendors, people, homeless people in streets to be part of shaping these streets in ways that meet their immediate needs, but also potentially allow them to enter some kind of shaping of the economy and the culture in these places. So that's just a general background. I think we want to look at this as an opportunity not just to fix some immediate problems and lead with solutions, but look to systemically change the governance processes of our public spaces, the financing approaches, and how we look at them from a design perspective. How do we really turn our streets inside out? How do we create what we sometimes call market cities, where the best streets in the world, every vendor, every store, every pedestrian, is almost competing to contribute to the life of the street, competing to contribute to everyone else's shared experience. And we sort of have retreated inside of our buildings, inside of our stores to some extent. And this is an opportunity to turn it all inside out and rethink it. We're going to make new mistakes, but if we do it really consciously and really learn from each other in networked conversations like this, we can come up with some great solutions that can really go viral around the world. So that's the goal of Placemaking Next, to facilitate the expertise in communities, to realize that communities are the experts. And now we're realizing that the placemaking community is the experts. There's so much incredible wisdom and knowledge out there that reflected by you all. We want to help amplify that, facilitate greater action, and show it so that we're not alone in doing this too. We're all figuring this out together. We all need humility, but we also need to think bigger about how we can have bigger impacts together. So just lastly, I'll say this actually builds nicely on a conversation we're having on Thursday. It builds for a conversation we're having on Thursday for informal communities, more in the global South, where in a way they have had the talent and capacity to have informal uses of public spaces, markets and vending. And now we need to figure out how to support them more directly. So these conversations will actually help inform each other a lot. So looking forward to this. I'll let you guys take over. Back to you, Ryan. Thanks.
Thank you. Well, with all those amazing things you just said, I want to throw it to Madeline really quickly, because Madeline's been talking a lot about these similar things, the seeds of regeneration, the city, the market city. Did you have some things you wanted to welcome us with, Madeline, and some thoughts related to that or your own?
No, well, just going off of what was described, it's interesting because I've been thinking a lot about the author Sadi Khan, which actually you introduced me to, Ryan, which is about the fact that it is a fight in order for us to make our streets public spaces and to open them up in a way that we've seen in European countries. And I think it's really interesting that a moment like this can be such an opportunity to actually build out something that I feel like in our cities that we've been working on very diligently, and it's very difficult, but something like this really has shifted that very quickly. And what then that's going to look like long term, and is it going to be sustainable, and how are we going to utilize this moment to actually really bring in that best picture, that open, porous idea that Ethan Kent just described, where that incompleteness can be completed in a way that's thoughtful.
And I think it's so nice to be able to go to this big picture. I know I was just on the phone with our operations guy talking about labor day rates and things like that. So does anyone else want to take a moment really quickly off of what Ethan said, this sort of higher level aspiration of what's happening, and just comment really quickly on that before we go into more local context? No, okay, we'll let that sit there. All right, well, thank you guys. And we'll go ahead and kick it off with some views from Santa Ana. And we're really excited because this has all happened very quickly. And it's a little tongue-in-cheek to put the framing of this on the streetery language. But really, what was so exciting was, as we were dealing with COVID on the day-to-day managing a business improvement district, we've been looking for every opportunity possible. And suddenly it seemed like there was a flash moment where a lot of systems aligned, a lot of interest aligned, and we were able to make a lot of moves really quickly. And we took that opportunity and we're really excited about it. But there is a lot of challenges and opportunities to learn more as we do this, and to share innovation across the network. So let's see, I'm gonna go ahead and share a quick screen presentation here. So this is Santa Ana, California, the context that Madeline and I are working in. And it's a compact, walkable, cultural, foodie, historic downtown, Southern California. It's sunny, it's the government seat of our county. It has a huge Latino dominant population and multicultural feeling and inclusive vibe to it. It's urban, it's historic. And this is kind of the grid overlay of our downtown. So we have these really fast streets that run through our downtown. They're like low graded at the county level, as like low grade highways almost running through our main streets. And those streets typically don't have much active street life. And then we have some really nice, pleasant main kind of thoroughfares. 4th Street, Calle Cuatro is our main walkable street. There's a few promenades, paseos, plazas, and then we have these kind of slow north-south streets that also are every other block. So it's kind of the layout of our downtown. This is an example of 4th Street. This is our main walking street that we have, and this is an example of Main Street. This is a arterial that cuts through our downtown and doesn't have much activation on those north-souths. So we've been trying to convince, the city to work with us. They've even had it in their own strategic plans to build parklets, enhance outdoor dining. We've showed examples from up the street from Long Beach that Alan, I think you had something to do with that one. We've had challenges with them wanting to implement these, mostly because either they felt that the traffic was too fast where it was wanted, or the costs were too high to implement something like this with regard to like the grading. So we've gone on and on and on. This was probably the one that got the furthest in our downtown. It was an idea for a parklet here in this space. The business actually had a landscape designer design this gorgeous sort of walkway and really enchanting space, but these projects always kind of got held up over the years. And so then we started seeing these articles coming out last week about businesses popping out, al fresco dining, et cetera, et cetera. And we kept sending to our city everything we saw so they could digest it. And they actually came back with a program they really happened to like, which was not one that we had sent them, but it was the Tampa recovery program, which they felt really articulated very clearly the different rules, adjustments, and I think maybe was more in line with where we were at the state of opening up as a district. And so they, within one day, were able to identify this plan and say, we're going to make our plan kind of related to that plan. And we jumped on a Zoom call, and we literally just carved up downtown. We looked at an overlay of where our businesses were, what space, public space, made sense, where it was safe, where it could serve businesses. And then we got on the phone and started calling those businesses and seeing, would you pop out? Does this make sense? Where would you go if you wouldn't go here? And this all got negotiated in the course of, minutes or hours. And just to show you what the opportunity that seemed to get seized on was, this is our downtown, and we have this kind of unique diagonal parking setup where there's sort of these little islands of 2-3 parking spaces or more. So we looked at basically reserving out spots, which the city had been hesitant to do stuff like this before because of traffic. So they didn't want cars, if the road was open, for someone to try and park somewhere and park on someone eating a pizza. And so we had recently purchased some K-rails and some fencing. And so we had our clean and safe team go out and basically walk up these spaces. The businesses popped out into the spaces. The ones that did do it reported that they made more money. They'd be willing to pay for the spaces to be able to pop out in the future. They'd love to activate the spaces with entertainment. This is one of the owners of one of the spaces. He bought this furniture off Facebook apparently in one day. And so next what we're looking at is the aesthetics and co-designing with the businesses. We'd love to design all of them or create that, but we don't think we probably have the budget for that. So it's really a collaborative and really spot creative effort. So whether that's color or umbrellas or what, that we work with co-creating the design for people, with people. There's been the discussion for the last several days along with these private spots, or they're calling them food islands, the idea of a common eating spaces that maybe we would manage, which we're less inclined towards because we don't have any additional resources to manage this stuff. So we're not really sure if that's wise, whereas looking to the private sector to create their own outdoor areas and manage those would be ideal for us. And then the city's response on this has been phenomenal. They're like, why weren't we doing this all along? We love this. And they're interested in now looking at moving forward. How do we make this permanent infrastructure? Could we apply as part of the recovery effort fundings to make permanent installations and things like that? And so, we went over some of the nuts and bolts this morning of, how this essentially worked. And what we essentially did was we did the setups, and what my clean and safe team would like to do is to leave them out there, because the real cost is coming in and setting them up and taking them down. We have a set number of K-rails, the water-filled barricades, which are safer, but they take longer for us to set up. And then there's some concern about the aesthetics, that things look like fences and this and that. So can we print banners on these things and stuff like that? So those are kind of the nuts and bolts. We're having a discussion with the businesses today at 3 p.m. to see what they thought. We talked to the city. We have enough equipment just amongst ourselves to set up 8 food islands. And then the city is willing to actually set up more if more requests come in. But we're going to be providing them at an at-request level at this point through that. So that's kind of what we have going in Santa Ana. Madeline, did I miss anything, or do you want to share anything else from our perspective, just from the Santa Ana side?
The only thing that I want to mention is that in the typically one of the barriers that I found in working downtown is the understanding of using a space in multiple ways, so multi-use. And I think that that's been very challenging because it's not imaginable to utilize a space in multiple ways. That's the only thing I really wanted to add, because that's one of the barriers.
Excellent. And then from an equity perspective, we're very interested in that, in seeding new businesses. We have incubator kitchens. There is a food truck ecology downtown, and the food trucks in Santa Ana actually are a very strong group because they had to, I guess there was a very oppressive regulation at one point, and so they had formed a group against this regulation. It's actually a very famous lawsuit. And so they're a very strong organization. So they've been having their own conversations with the city to see as well what can be done to accommodate as well. So that's what we know as far as being in touch. I'm going to jump now over to Cheryl Muriente in West Palm Beach, Florida, because you did something similar in launching a very extensive, very amazing, very beautiful dining program. So I'd love to compare and contrast our two approaches that we were able to achieve.
Sure. Hi, Ryan. So thank you for having me here. I'm Cheryl Muriente. I'm the manager of urban placemaking for the West Palm Beach DDA. I'm going to share with you a couple of slides so you can visually see what we did. But, just to give an overview, we've been probably for the past, I would say 10 years working on all sorts of placemaking projects, tactical urbanism projects, you name it. We've probably worked with a lot of the people that are out there, like Gell Architects, I know Better Block was in town at some point. You know, just a lot of these great thinkers have come through our town. So we've been very blessed to be able to experiment for a long time now. And we went from doing pop-up things to now looking at that in-between and temporary use that we're trying to achieve. So let me just go ahead and share my screen. Oh, Ryan, I need some backup. I need you to give me permission to share.
Oh, my bad.
It's okay. But just in essence, you know, past projects that we have worked on, we did look at how to do alleyways as pedestrian ways. And then we went ahead and also have done parklet studies, parklet pilot projects. And, you know, we fast forward and the latest thing that has come as part of this use is to start making our main street, which is Clematis Street, into a curbless street. And so that construction started 2 years ago with the help and design of Victor Dover and a lot of other people in that team as well. And Dining on the Spot, which is what we are rolling out right this minute, is a project that kind of took all that nice set of like storm that was already happening and gave us a platform to actually do it. So just as a starter, we had a group of people from the city, the DDA, the CRA working together on an economic development program and how were we going to respond back to COVID-19. And so it's really been a big collaborative effort, not just from the business community, but also from government itself. And we kind of put our heads together and came up with this. So, you know, when we look at our studies, our biggest, let's say, thing that makes people come to downtown are really events, but restaurants is the second one. So this is something we do every other year, and we get data to understand what's going on. And if you see again, dining is the most frequent reason why people visit our city. And so here's our downtown. It's approximately 0.68 square miles. So think about it like 340 football fields put next to each other. And so we really went in and identified right now 25 restaurants that are storefronts that we can work with. We would like to then see retail expand into that. We evaluated the space, so we started looking at what was there. You know, is it a street in front of them, a parking space? Is it a sidewalk? How wide is that? Is there an alleyway that's usable nearby? And then we figured, let's try a pilot experiment. And that was not this weekend, but the past one. And we laid out the options to prove that it could be done. And then we evaluated that with pedestrian counts and stationary activity placement on a map to then inform the city as to how to do this as a program for the rest of the city. And so here are the quick, like phase 1 and phase 2 areas. There's everything from open public spaces to sidewalks. And these are the places we actually looked at. And so the first thing we came up with is like, do we have a grid? You know, what does this 6-foot distance look like quickly by just placing tables in the centralized spot of it? And therefore, this was the kind of program elements we came up with to then do it. So first thing is make the pretty picture, show the government, you know, show City Hall the pretty picture, show your vendor the pretty picture, and imagine it by drawing it out. So this is our Main Street Clematis, that's curbless. And we kind of imagine what if we had this, and we did a couple of reiterations actually, but this one would actually respect certain things we need. Since we took over the sidewalk, we kind of put it in the middle. So this is what half a block of closure would look in a main street. And we also need that clearance to make sure that emergency vehicles can go through in the case of an emergency. We also look side by side. Some of these businesses in the street are not dining. So we created a pickup zone as well that you see in yellow for the retailers to use. And so after we presented all these beautiful pictures and kind of convinced everybody, we went out to the field and actually got it on the ground. And these were the first 5 locations for the test. And as you can see from the picture, we went to reality. And I would say that on the first point of putting these out, we probably saw, we have numbers from before. So on a typical Saturday night, I could have gotten about 300 people just walking through the block. And we were counting 90, 95 people coming through the block on a Saturday night. So you're seeing about a third of the the typical pedestrian population coming through, and just starting to do this hybrid between the restaurant and where places can sit. Some of the tables are being maintained by the restaurants, so they kind of adopted them. Other parts that are not like that, that are free to be used by anybody, we are actually deploying a team to be able to clean and keep the place tidy. And then this is a different example of a very quick parklet. I mean, these are just parking spaces. We tented them and just let that be like an outdoor dining experience. And then we came back and put a little bit more, not only safety, but also that visual friction for cars not to zoom by putting the planters in place. This street became a street that's just going slow speed, 5 miles per hour. It's shared. And we just put that on both ends and let people negotiate their space together. And as you can see, the restaurants when they start taking stewardship over them, at least the ones that are right in front, they, start decorating and making their own place for the people to come here. This is just another example. And then this is an example on open public space that is being leased by a private owner. We started working with him. So you have a lot of hybrids going on here. Anybody can sit on the hammock, but inside you can also dine or just walk by with your food. But something we're learning is that it's good to have stewardship from the businesses themselves. This helps a lot. And again, this is the future. We're going to our alleyways and just going through. I can go a little bit onto cost, but just to keep it short and easy, just to give an idea, the first phase is rental. We are supporting it as the DDA as part of our economic development, money to actually put people back to work in our downtown. But this can be phased out into something where once the restaurant's up and running, they can rent themselves something that works for them. The city has created an application for any of the businesses to use. So it's not just us as a special taxing district that can do it. Anybody from private sector can actually apply right now and do their own parklet or do their own outdoor dining space if the space is permitting, and they just go through that, the set of rules that we've put together. So that's pretty much it in a nutshell.
Wow, Cheryl, it's so amazing. And I so appreciate you putting the costs in there, because that's really, I don't know how people feel about sharing this type of information, but it really comes down to what can you afford? What can you get permitted? Where's the leniency? And it seems like what I see, I've never been to your downtown. So when I look at my downtown and your downtown, is yours more, you seem to have more control of the space, or it maybe feels a little more pedestrian oriented, whereas ours is more of a traditional urban, pre-car urban downtown. It seems like you have a lot of interesting flex space.
Yeah, I think we've been working on that by collaborating with the city so much on the projects that we tested out before. And so, yes, we are moving to a more pedestrian oriented city. We still have a lot of work to do in our side streets. But if when you come down to it, it would feel that everybody's kind of been going on this trajectory for the last 10 or so years. And so it makes it a little bit easier. That's for sure. Like the engineering department gets it. They're looking at working with us to do new signage so that the loading zones can have a very specific time for loading and specific time for that multi-use space of, you know, a loading zone, and then make it parking or make it a pickup zone. And so we're experimenting with all those rules about place.
It's fantastic. Madeline or Ethan, did you have any questions for Cheryl as well? Just a big thumbs up for you.
You know what? I have one, Ryan. It does sound like it's interesting because I know that Ryan, through International Downtown Association, was on a group that did, they talked about municipal partnerships. And it sounds like you guys have a really strong municipal partnership going on with your city to be able to be working through each of these things. And that was something that I thought was interesting.
Yeah, I think it's great to note that, Cheryl, you're with the DDA, a Downtown Development Authority. Madeline and I are with the BID, Business Improvement District. So maybe a position a little bit more on the private side, and you're maybe a little more on the government side, but right there in that middle interfacey space. So that's fantastic. I think a good transition to go to next would be Alan Pullman over in Long Beach, who's an architect that's done a lot of placemaking, a lot of innovative street activation with the buildings that his firm builds. And I believe you're working with the city of Long Beach on its recovery.
Sure, I'd love to. I did have a question for Cheryl, if I could ask it.
Yeah, please.
So on these dining areas, are these common areas for all the restaurants to share, or are there specific seats that belong to or associated with specific restaurants? And who's doing all the cleaning and maintenance and hygiene things?
So yes, depending on the typology. So let's say the shared street where we closed half of the block, it is a hybrid where certain tables and chairs, let's say, are adopted by a restaurant that are right in front of them. So they will clean it, they will maintain it. We have put together a protocol that is actually in the works because this was really fast. But we have consulted with a company on how to best clean. And so we are giving all this information to the businesses, training them. And we're training some trainers ourselves so that this can multiply, you know, and that becomes like the best practice for all. And then those who are not adopted tables and chairs or umbrellas, we have a clean team and a security team that helps out with everything.
That's
but
great.
It's quite a lot of work. It's we added, I think it's so every table is four chairs, and we added something like 30 some tables to that half of a block. It's quite a lot of maintenance, but something that can be then given to others to do.
Great. Okay. That was very inspirational. So I could talk a little bit, Ryan, about what we're doing here in Long Beach. I think we're calling it Open Streets Long Beach. Can you see my screen? I'm not sure if I'm sharing. Okay, great. Excellent. So we've been working with the city. Just a little bit about myself. I'm Alan Pullman with Steel 111 Architects. And as Ryan said, we're architects, but we've really worked a lot in street demonstrations and outreach projects for communities trying to create more livable streets and communities. A little bit about us. This initiative started with us as soon as there was that shutdown in California, trying to think about, well, how will things reopen? And we did a little blog post and did this little diagram of like some of the things that may have to happen in our public spaces. This is on Pine Avenue in the city of Long Beach, one of the main shopping streets in the city. And it got a lot of interest, and we thought, well, doing this drawing is just really just the start. We have to demonstrate it. So we got together with the local business improvement district, and we said, let's just do this demonstration. Let's not ask permission. Let's just do it and show people, invite the city to it, but just to show them some of the simple things that can be done and work with some of the merchants on the street. There were a couple of small independent restaurants right on the street that we talked to, and they were very excited about trying this out. And so I think it was mostly duct tape and supplies we already had in our shop that we used to put this up in like a 2-hour span. And it was really well received. We wanted it to look nice and be colorful, but we wanted to show that there is a way of adjusting some of our streets. This is a pretty simple little thing. We just created a parklet out of 2 shopping spaces, parking spaces, excuse me. And then we actually did create a pickup and drop-off zone and create a big sign for that. We wanted to see how that would be resonate, because there are still lots of different divergent views about whether you can just totally exclude cars as you kind of go through the recovery, since pickup and drop-off are still such an important part of some of the businesses' sort of ongoing operations. And it was very well received. And I think what the city saw was like, we really need to move this. And there was an imperative to reopen streets and reopen businesses and how to do that. So we started working with the city. They started to put together what they call their COVID-19 recovery open streets, kind of a little bit of a big name there, but it could be more poetic, I suppose. But they really started to put together a program for the whole city. We just did it on one area of downtown. But Long Beach is a city of 500,000 people, 51 square miles. So it was very ambitious to say we're going to open streets throughout all the different neighborhoods of the city. But I think it's a good idea for them to really be putting that together. And they used our demonstration as one of the Kickstarter kind of components to that. So these are their program goals, which is to open streets, not just for businesses, but also for recreation and giving communities a little bit more space to spread out, which a lot of cities we know are doing as well. And they've been pretty, I think, pretty bold about things like taking out traffic lanes and converting it to outdoor seating, reducing car travel, reducing parking to make that happen. These are some of their diagrams. And also, just like we saw in West Palm Beach, also looking at totally closing down certain streets, putting the emergency lane through, but really actually doing a complete closed street demonstration project for a couple of weeks, maybe even a month. So they're very open to that thinking. This is a diagram that the city put together. We helped them with a little bit on one of the city's main shopping streets. It's a 5-lane road, and they're looking at actually taking out a lane of traffic, taking out parking, converting it to diagonal parking, and closing down parts of the streets, spreading out tables and chairs, and really expanding the public space for use for some of these restaurants that are trying to reopen. So this is some of their next steps. This is a policy that they put together, or an aspirational policy that the city council voted on and said, let's do it, and let's do it throughout the city. But the specific policy now is where the rubber hits the road and what they're trying to work out. So some of the issues and next steps that we kind of are trying to help them with, and I have a call with the city tomorrow to discuss this, is that I would say that little guerrilla demonstration without permission, but it was worth it. It got a lot of feedback, and it made us realize that there was definitely a strong demand for this in the city, throughout the city, and that response was citywide, not just in the immediate area where we worked. There was definitely going to be, there was a lot of support, but there needs to be consensus. So if streets need to have both outdoor dining and pedestrian areas as well as cars, that needs to be worked through in a very specific way. Also, I think there is that issue of outreach. How do you outreach to the overall community to make sure this is something they could support? Where does the equity focus come in when there's some parts of the community that aren't really participating in that outreach? And I think that's something that we're thinking about a lot before we start just doing things, really making sure that we're talking to as many stakeholders as possible and not just the businesses. And right now we have a policy, but the process is still a little unclear. And that's what I'm trying to work with the city, and hopefully we'll get it in place as California kind of opens up more and more businesses. So things like licensing and permits and how that process works hasn't been figured out yet. Who covers liability insurance? Not every place that wants to do this has a business improvement district. So if it becomes a merchant association, how do they do that? How alcohol gets served in outdoor spaces is still trying to work out. So these are really nuts and bolts things, but I actually think that they affect the success of the project. And then also just who's taking overall responsibility for cost, operations, and maintenance. Again, this is really a program for all parts of the city, and there's a lot of parts of the city that are underserved and don't have a lot of money for these kind of programs. So how that all goes together, I think, is something the city's going to try to look at as well. So that's a little bit about open streets in Long Beach.
Wow, Alan. Now, you said a lot of interesting things. One is you're calling these areas flex zones, and I've never heard that term. Is that a commonly used term? I really like how it insinuates more activity would be going on there than just dining.
I think we want to use it because what we feel that should happen is these should be experimental. They should be flexible. And we call them flex zones because it may have some car traffic, but a lot of pedestrian traffic. It might have one configuration during the week and a different configuration on the weekend. It may feel one way during commuting times in the morning. You know, one of our favorite coffee shops says, I need to have some pull-up spaces for pickup for my coffee business or else I can't survive, but I don't need it after, you know, the morning's over. So it's all about flexibility, experimenting. I mean, I think we're all into that. How do we do things that we could test easily and then adapt and move as we go? I think that's really the key here. And I'm encouraged to hear cities much more open to that kind of flexible thinking and adaptive thinking than they have been maybe in the past.
Well, I'm really glad you're thinking on that granular level of even what times things need to operate, because that's exactly the type of feedback that we're getting is, you know, in the morning, the coffee shop really needed all that extra seating, but by afternoon, it became a burden on them to be managing a large empty seating area. And so it really is space by space, case by case at this point. And I love what you did, taking the initiative with the Gorilla, really well-produced Gorilla project that, you know, you probably looked at or knew inherently what some of the requirements might be from all your work with doing curbside dining projects, and then implementing that in a really high quality way. It gave the city a lot more comfort with saying yes to a breadth of, you know, opportunity. And that's very much also echoes the experience we've had, is that the city really wants to see things and see examples and react to things versus propose things. And we even got in a situation where we were very much in touch with each individual business who'd be receiving a patio. And then the city got really excited and they put out a few additional patios, and those ones did not work because those businesses were not ready to adopt the patio. They didn't have the furniture. They didn't plan to be open at that time. So it really is. And I saw Cheryl also had photos of her going out speaking directly to stakeholders and how important that on the ground experience is for the look and feel of it, the operation of it, the nuts and bolts of who's cleaning it, who's maintaining it, is it ADA accessible, are there other stakeholders who are being stepped over or ignored? We will hear maybe from Alex. We read in an article he shared about purple lining, which is a phrase also I'd never heard about, overlooking people by doing these quick planning processes that we're sort of also excited about. So thanks so much. Madeline, did you want to say anything about that as well?
No, I just would like to hear more about how the community dialogue is, since you just mentioned at the very end, how folks feel about that working specifically. So we can go on though.
Great. So let's jump over to Jason Roberts. He's been doing a lot of interesting stuff with the furniture. Oh, actually, I have to share your photo. So let's wait because I've got to set that up. I don't have that set up yet. Let's jump over to Robin. So Robin over at the planning department for the city of San Francisco, who's also looking at the nuts and bolts and the city policy side of how this is going to work to present. And I'll go ahead and Jason, get your photos ready for next.
Great. Hello, everyone. Thank you, Ryan, for setting this up. It's good to see you and Ethan and Madeline and so many colleagues from all over the country who are working, you know, really hard to apply themselves to the crisis of the day. So this is really inspiring. I always love being able to learn from our partners in other cities about all of the innovation that's happening there and share a little bit about what we're doing. So let's go ahead and share my screen. Okay, so I'm Ryan asked me to talk about nuts and bolts and to get into some of the, the technical aspects of what we're thinking through here, which I am going to do a little bit. But as I do, Ethan knows this about me, as do you, Ryan. I'm a real systems thinker, and I'm always trying to understand how these individual strategies and the kind of tactical urbanism and the tactical governance that we do kind of on the ground in the moment to quickly respond to situations like this fits into a longer term vision and sets us up for longer term transformation. So I'm looking at this very much from kind of from the city policy point of view, an urban policy point of view. How are we attaching or relating things like streeteries, sidewalk dining, curbside loading, and curbside pickup? All of these things that our departments are scrambling to put into place, how they all relate back to a set of maybe universal principles that can help us guide decisions we make now, as well as decisions we make moving forward. So, there's a lot of discussion right now. I think, it's very germane, it's very appropriate about the typologies, the strategies. What do we do? What are the techniques we put on the ground? Is it closing a street for recreation? Is it temporarily expanding a sidewalk for safe passage? And then we kind of work our way back, we sort of back into principles. And I want to suggest that maybe, we try to look at it from sort of both directions and invert the way that we're approaching solutions and really orient them to some of the core principles and the reasons that we as placemakers and placemaking leaders are in this field, right? Why do we do this? And how can our response always tie back to those principles? So I have to give a shout out to some of our public space and mobility advocates here in San Francisco, and specifically the San Francisco Bicycle Coalition, Livable City, and Walk SF, who recently issued this statement about these 5 key principles that they see being a way to relate all of the activity that we're seeing the city undertake in response to COVID under sort of a unifying umbrella or framework. And I think this is really key. It's really important as we as sort of city technocrats are diving deep into the kind of like, well, how do we make a parklet work in COVID, or how do we deploy a citywide slow streets program? I think there's a tendency, as we're working really hard and being really concentrated, to have our heads down. And I want to encourage us all as leaders in government and in departments and NGOs in the private sector, and for friends at Studio 111, to look up and make sure that we're checking ourselves and reminding ourselves about what it is that we're all working towards, right? So clearly there's physical distancing. We need to retrofit our urban environment, our built environment. We need to change our regulatory programs and our regulatory environment so that people can get around safely and appropriately distanced from one another. Something that was touched on in the conversation just earlier and is always essential. It's always a principle we should be thinking about, is equity. We know that the virus and the pandemic is exacerbating a lot of existing inequities, right? And so, again, as we've got our heads down and we're thinking about specific technical details and liability and all of the things that the engineering, site design, all of those things that we have to think through when we're reimagining our public realm, both in the current stage as well as future stages, we have to recognize that some communities are even harder hit than others by this virus. The neighborhood I live in, 94124 Bayview, highest number of COVID-related fatalities, already disconnected in many ways, socially and economically disadvantaged, et cetera. So again, as we're thinking about what strategies and tools to apply, is it a slow street right now, right here? Is that the response that one community might need? It might be appropriate and helpful for another community, but maybe not the first line response, or at least coming with a number of other strategies and responses. well-being. There's a lot of emphasis on physical exercise, but there is a social and psychological crisis that is unfolding beside this public health one, right? And we know that the work we do as placemakers can be part of addressing that. Similar to equity, there's so many other places where the government can turn and with whom they can partner. So there are awesome design firms like Studio 111, for example. There's the private sector. There are our nonprofit and non-governmental advocacy groups, right? They all have a role to play and they all want to be part of the solution. And as we're creating these programs, say city-sponsored programs, are we adequately creating places and ways for agencies and other partners like that to plug in and be part of the solution? Finally, just experimentation. How do we cut some of the bureaucracy that we're all used to, right? Streamline, and maybe how can we transform those business practices into something that is a state that's more permanent and a more efficient way of conducting business with our communities. So, starting with those tools, shout out to NACDO and Mike Lydon and the folks at Street Plans and Sam Schwartz for quickly pulling together this wonderful, very comprehensive inventory, right? Or this sort of set of typological kind of responses. Slow streets, pickup delivery zones. I'm going to talk through some of these. I find that the NACDO Street Plans, way of dissecting our public realm is a really handy and ready one. In San Francisco right now, there are 2 of the 7, there's only 6 shown on the slide, but 2 of the 7 strategies have already been enacted. We have the slow streets and a kind of pickup delivery program underway, right? So there are slow streets in most of the city, and because this is a rapid deployment and the transportation agency is having to respond to the crisis or many different dimensions and aspects of the crisis. This hasn't been a rollout of a program over the entire city overnight. It's happening in stages, but we are seeing streets closed to, or not closed, but rather shared to accommodate, outdoor well-being activities as well as getting around. There's also a temporary loading zone program that our municipal transportation agency has made available for small businesses in our neighborhood commercial districts. So you can, go to the transportation agency's website, submit an application or request to have the curbside out front of your particular storefront reserved, essentially closed to parking to facilitate that loading. So that stuff is all underway. Some things are on their way, right? And we're thinking about an ecology of tools or strategies, a whole toolbox of them. San Francisco's working to make other things possible. So, that we'll get to outdoor dining, I promise. I know this is a streetery-focused discussion. But, thinking holistically and under a unified framework about how all of these different tools work together to either support each other, maybe are more appropriate in one neighborhood versus another right now, right? Over time, different stages of recovery, kind of the appropriateness and feasibility of certain strategies might become, more appropriate and feasible. So, wow, all right, just speeding through here. We're losing, I think it's over 130 permanent parking spaces in order to create a quick build bicycle lane on Fell Street, going from Golden Gate Park towards downtown. And this is significant because the existing bicycle and sort of, jogging path is absolutely jammed full of people, right? So there's a real need to have an infrastructural response to allow more people to get around using these sustainable modes of transportation safely to facilitate distancing. So this is a really encouraging development. Our mayor, Mayor London Breed, this morning actually just issued a press release on the Shared Spaces program, which includes outdoor dining, as well as a number of other tools and opportunities for commercial districts, community benefit districts, small businesses to access the street, the resource of the street and sidewalk, and to leverage that in a different way than they have been before. So, you know, there's relaxing of regulation. But I also just want to call out that just looking at this picture, which is in the Castro, one of, you know, the most highly visited neighborhoods in our city, but there are a lot of performance demands on our streets, right? There's safe mobility for pedestrians. We have to accommodate transit, buses and other vehicles, as well as cyclists. So that curbside is a very contested piece of real estate, and it's very, very complicated to figure out how to use it. Thankfully, in San Francisco, we have been running a parklet program here for over 10 years at this point. Our first parklet was installed in 2009. So we have a really good handle on how to leverage that curbside or that parking lane and figure out how to make it work for habitation by people. So we have a lot of, you know, fantastic standards that help community groups, as well as the various city departments who are responsible for entitling this, understand issues of site and situation, right? Protective barriers and perimeter treatments, and critically accessibility for our disabled residents. So parklets.org, if you want to check out the Parklet manual, it's heavily influencing the way that we are structuring the technical requirements for our streeteries or our shared space eatery zones. Obviously, as I mentioned earlier, the urban issues and challenges that we face, that we've always faced, are exacerbated by the current crisis. Shelters in San Francisco have had to reduce capacity in order to accommodate distancing within the facilities themselves. That means there's a lot of displacement, right? And where are people going? That in and of itself is an issue. But also, if you just live in this neighborhood, this is a picture from our city's Tenderloin, you know, if you live in a 5-floor walk-up on this street and you need to get from your house to the market or from your house to the bus, it's impossible to social distance in some parts of dense neighborhoods like the Tenderloin, and indeed dense neighborhoods throughout the country. And so as we think about what strategies are appropriate for which places at what time, you know, there are a number of different factors that should really help us develop the appropriate response. So I always just come back to these principles, right? In any neighborhood and at any stage of recovery, are we always satisfying these 5 criteria that the Bike Coalition, Livable City, and Walk SF have put together? And if we're not, what else could we be doing? Is it some other tool? Is it some other strategy that's appropriate for the place and the time? So, you know, the Tenderloin kind of crowded sidewalk example, again, for me really brings home that, of course, for urbanists and designers, like many of the people on this call, we're really, really excited, right, about the urban design potential, the opportunity to, you know, leverage this crisis as a moment of transformation to utterly reformulate, in particular, how our built environment looks and it functions. And so for some folks, you know, their needs and their preoccupations are to get out into public space and enjoy a bit of grass. And, you know, in some cities, both Brooklyn and here in San Francisco, there is an urban design response to that that's really playful. And for other people, you know, there are a different set of needs, right? If you are unhoused, if you are living on the street, where do you go? What do you do? In San Francisco, strategies like this, which is or places like this, which is in our civic center, which is part of our mayor's plan for addressing the crowded conditions in the Tenderloin streets, sort of, you know, and the experience of the of unhoused and housed folks in that neighborhood. This is part of San Francisco's toolbox, necessarily, for addressing the issues that we have. And as I look around other parts of the country and you know, in other places, I'm really curious about how we're responding, you know, to this issue. How does food justice, for example, and food, the issue of food deserts, which again are pre-existing issues, how is that figuring into our tactical COVID response, right? And how can Streateries or related kind of food delivery programs be part of that toolkit and that toolbox? Thinking about equity, where are we closing streets relative to, you know, density, relative to neighborhoods that might not have as much per capita access to open space? These questions come up for me as we're drawing lines on maps and trying to figure out where we act next. That equity framework for me is something that's a real driver and is very key. What about existing placemaking programs like Play Streets, right? Or pre-existing ones that maybe aren't necessarily appropriate for the moment, where, you know, play and touch and, you know, close proximity to your neighbors and your neighbors' kids aren't really feasible, where they're indeed dangerous, right? Putting ourselves as well as our community at large in danger. Is there a role still for open streets and play streets type programs, either in the sort of near or kind of far stages of recovery? I think there are, and you know, our city right now isn't necessarily thinking about this because there are more urgent issues. But in general, you know, as urbanists and placemakers, we know that there are certain programs that work, that have a deployment mechanism and you know, whole programmatic infrastructure in order to get out to communities, to do outreach with communities, to get them engaged, to get them involved in stewardship. So I'm also thinking ahead about how we can scale these and maybe scale them in a different way that's appropriate to kind of the physical distancing requirements of, you know, stage 2, stage 3, stage 4 recovery in California, and what that might look like. Also, when we're thinking about, you know, these principles, right? Access to open space, a safe way to sort of transport oneself there or to get there. We have, you know, great existing frameworks, and we've already answered a lot of these questions, right? Where do these alignments make sense? Because they connect one open space asset to another, or a less affluent neighborhood to a park, you know, that might not be in their immediate vicinity, but is a clear and safe passage for them to access the resource. Finally, just wrapping up here, I think I'm way over time, I'm sorry, Ryan, but, you know, thinking about, again, some of the existing typologies and programs we have, right? Play streets, parklets. You know, one thing that's come up for us in San Francisco, which I think is so emblematic of the kind of the attitude towards placemaking and publicness that San Francisco celebrates and really, like, you know, is assertive about, is that for us, public parklets, for example, they're public places, right? You don't need to engage in a commercial transaction or buy a cup of coffee or buy a meal in order to occupy this open space resource. And we're sticking by that. There is a need to create even more space, take up even more of the street to facilitate outdoor dining and support our small businesses and our restaurants. And so, you know, we're adopting some vocabulary and a framework to help keep that distinction and sort of very much alive and present, right? So streeteries aren't our official terminology yet for outdoor dining, but, you know, we want to be clear with the public as well as our private partners that we want to accommodate economic recovery through like Streatery-like program, but that also as San Franciscans we have real values about our open spaces being accessible to all persons, irrespective of their economic status or their ability to participate in a financial transaction. So coming towards the end here, I don't know what you all are thinking, colleagues in other cities, about the partnership piece. We certainly have community benefit districts or business improvement districts in San Francisco. This is a somewhat outdated map, but the takeaway is that neighborhoods with assessment districts tend to be those which are more affluent, have more capacity to be self-organized, right, and go through the whole legal process of becoming an assessment district. So these are always the first places we look when we think about having successful partnerships and innovating and piloting new programs. And it's a great place to start. But again, what about other neighborhoods where we don't have the same kind of resource, right? Does that mean the city has a different kind of institutional response to different parts of the city than they might have in others? Closing note on embracing experimentation. I think we're all really excited about the potential for this crisis to result in less bureaucratic red tape, not only for the public, for our small businesses who are trying to create streeteries, but also us as folks in the city who run these placemaking programs and other opportunities. We want to further streamline and lower barriers for participation so that even more and more of our communities can participate. So with that, I'll just say thanks and stop sharing my screen in case anyone has any questions or is provoked by any of the thoughts that I brought forward.
Wow, Robin, thanks so much for centering so much of that conversation from a high level to all the way down to the ground. Really love the values document that you shared. And I think that that's a really important piece as a lot of decisions get made fast, to be able to check back and make sure that that decision fits a framework of shared thinking. I think I've already seen really a need for something like that. Also, just wanted to shout out, I know you started with the City of San Francisco this morning, a weekly placemaker conversation at 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. So that's going to be weekly. And that was a really awesome conversation. I look forward to joining those conversations in the future. Madeline, did you have something you wanted to ask Robin about? Okay, great. Yeah, so thank you again for all that you do for the network. And I think as we saw a lot of in some of the other presentations, the sort of information that's been unpacked in experimentation and around parklets is very relevant to this conversation. I think we're seeing a lot of reaction in general to the word streetery and the insinuation that that's a food business dominated space, which I think we all want to see more flexible usage and inclusiveness, both for future businesses, for non-traditional brick and mortars, for community activity. And that I loved what you brought about that these maybe Main Street or a streetery is a part of a multifunctional topography of streets where there's now the bike lane connecting across town, and then there's resident slow streets, and then there's eat streets, and then there's different sorts of uses, and looking at how those systems pull together. And I appreciate you sharing the NACDO document, because that document, I shared the link in the Facebook, but very simple to understand illustrations of multiple configurations of streetscapes that are really just brilliant document, and kudos to those guys that put that together. So we'll jump over to Jason Roberts to look at some of the local human scale furniture that can help make these transitions more inclusive and more human scale, and hopefully invite local commerce too. So Jason, are you?
You're going to be driving, or do you want me to drive? I can share if you want me to, or you got it?
Oh, I'm ready, but you go ahead. You probably do better because you can click through.
So if I choose, let me just make sure I've got the right screen here. Let's see. Okay. All right. tell me if you see my screen okay?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so of course, I head up the Better Block, a nonprofit foundation in Dallas, and of course we do work all over. But one of the big things that we started focusing on with our work was fabrication, and specifically digital fabrication and open sourcing. The ideas we come up with, so whether we could kind of create a shared network of folks who are able to use these elements. The other interesting thing I have in Dallas is I own a restaurant and a jazz bar and an outdoor retail store. So because of that, I'm actually able to apply these ideas pretty rapidly, where most the business owners are a little gun shy to kind of go in and work with the city, and they don't want to trigger any kind of permitting process. And then the costs seem to be insurmountable. So they tend to be reticent to even go down the path. So the nice thing about having a foot in both camps is I can apply these, and then I can start putting them in other places in the city pretty quickly. What you see, this first image is my restaurant, Oddfellows. And I had actually designed these fruit and vegetable stands for a project in Charlotte, actually. And so it's single sheet of plywood, easily, it's friction fit, no glue, screws, or nails. We actually have a site on our website called COVID-19. You can kind of see some of the downloads that you can begin kind of outfitting and turning your restaurants into bodegas. And the idea here for us was, like, we had just at the restaurant bought all this inventory. We're going into our brunch weekend, because we do a large brunch business. And then that got, of course, turned off. And so I had all of this product. I had to figure out what to do with that. So fortunately, I had these fruit and vegetable stands ready to go for a project that was supposed to happen a week later that also got delayed. So one of the tools that we see people starting to use and download, it's been really helpful, been very popular. It kind of, I think, also is a potential tool for the food desert conversations that we have, since you have all of these restaurants in the area that could also kind of convert to this type of use. This is a house, actually. It's an outdoor retail store that I have with some friends, and we just rapidly turned the front yard into a beer garden. We had an Airstream, so we started selling food, and we started doing performances from the porch. And so that was kind of this rapid transformation that we were able to do in that space, because I didn't want to have people in the house, because it's actually kind of a pretty small house overall. And then the jazz venue I have, we just immediately started putting the tables and chairs outside. So the issue I faced with music was that, a lot of these musicians can't get unemployment insurance because they're not W-2 or salaried employees. They usually get their money from gigs. And so when the gigs go away, they don't have a resource. And so we went into overdrive trying to figure out, how do we help our musicians? So we started doing live streams from the space just for them to use. We started putting tables and chairs outside that were inside the venue. So making kind of a spontaneous parklet. And then kind of the next big step was we went and let the bands go play in the neighborhood. And so now what happens, the word of mouth has occurred, is that everyone gets excited about the band coming into the neighborhood, and they get word of mouth, and they kind of keep getting, we're doing actually this funny, like the great 2020 tour of our neighborhood, because it's going to have just the street names that the band has gone out and played. But this, we talk about streeteries, but I also think kind of this adaptive use of our existing facilities and how that spreads out into some of our other areas is kind of an exciting potential. And they're actually they're busier now than they were as musicians playing all the various clubs. I mean, they are, I think 3 streets a day busy. So it's kept them afloat, kept them alive. The social distancing, it's really helped. So I went from the cafe seating to then the next big thing was Dallas had been talking about a parklet for about 10 years. And never could get it really off the ground. With the Better Blocks, we'd actually built a handful. So I just went in kind of overnight, very illegally, just built a fairly robust one with my staff. And the nice thing and interesting thing about this parklet was that the city had been trying to figure out how to get these done, couldn't figure it out. Before this, I was on a call with they've moved it over, the parklet builds into the special events, Office of Special Events. And so we were giving them the guidelines on how we put everything together, what our lessons learned. What the big things we learned from the Better Block is, if I don't build it first, every worst case scenario will be put out there for why it's not going to work, that'll never get done. So, and I know all of us have probably been through that experience. So, I heard, you hear it's going to be, homeless people are going to make it into an encampment. It's like, well, that doesn't really behoove the business really to have somebody sleeping. And usher, you're very exposed. But they also say it's, there's cars are going to come, or you're going to lose parking. In Dallas, it's a big deal to lose parking. And so they talk about how this is just one space, and now I can fit 6 feet apart. I can fit about 9 people, or 3 groups of 3 in that space. The other worries was that there's going to be drunk drivers that are just going to come down the street and hit these things, which to me I thought was ironic because we never talk about drunk drivers going around and hitting inline parking cars. But for some reason, once we put something else out besides a car, the worry is it's going to get hit. So we kind of had to talk the staff through this, and we're going to build this up. We obviously made a pretty robust edge there, and I can fill this. I can make a concrete bladder that I can fill this in and give myself a little bit more of a crash ability on this. But again, overarchingly, I have a hard time in Dallas and many cities. I think we have this of just getting these ideas off the ground because of these worst case scenarios. So part of this process of the tactical urbanism, what we learned is you've got to get it on the ground. You got to dispel these myths and these presumptions and let people kind of kick the tires a bit. And then once they kind of see it's not going to be, the end of the world, we start getting the city contact us back and say, okay, how do we implement these more? So it's kind of ironic how that unfolds. Now, if you go to the venue next door, I've started taking all additional beer garden tables and spanning them all to the edge of that parklet. So I'm taking up every parking space I possibly can right now. The other thing was the city wanted to do a temporary parklet program. And one of the big things I found with parklets to make them successful is people need to feel like there's not a car kind of at their, bookending them. They don't feel that that sense of like something at your back, right? So we went in and we took those. I don't know if you guys have ever seen in Versailles, they've got these classic planters that were built in the 17th century. Fascinating story. It was built because the Sun King Louis wanted to actually have an orange orchard. And you had to bring the orange trees in and out during the winter. So we just I'd seen them when I was there, and I loved how they kind of moved them in and out of these spaces pretty rapidly. So we kind of reverse engineered their planter and put it on casters. And so that way I can go in and create a bookend and put cafe seating in there right away. So simple things. And so the city's asking for me to go take the parking lot and just start retrofitting throughout the parking lot with some of these planter concepts. Other idea that we put together was this, we made a market stall, a collapsible market stall, designed off of one that I saw in Slovenia. It just takes the concept of your standard pop-up tent, your 10 by 10, but makes it a little bit more hardy and robust. So it won't blow over, doesn't need to have weights on it. It is heavier, but it does collapse. And these retail merchants can now pull this out into the street and start selling goods, or the landlord can allow other lessees or potential lessees to come in and rent these. So we just started putting those together, and those have been fairly popular in our neighborhood. And then kind of on the programmatic side, we worked with Kansas City, Missouri, so Casey Moe, on their Open Streets how-to guide. It's working with Spin as a partner on this. And basically what we did was they've unrolled a program to allow neighbors to petition to have their street turned into an open street. So it's at the neighborhood level. It's segmented, obviously. And with this guide, we kind of break down the process of, how do you go and reach out to your neighbors? We've got some of our WikiBlock digital fabricated barriers you can download and start, or you can use existing barricades, it doesn't matter. And then we have like wayfinding signage that people can download and use for these projects that are temporary, made with OSB, very simple, light, all notched. And kind of the last thing, anybody here on the placemaking call who went to Chattanooga for the PPS placemaking conference would have seen our Better Block in a Box. So it's basically just a shipping container full of all of our furniture, umbrellas, basically plaza elements, large games that can be all assembled by the community. So they flat pack, they can come out and then rapidly be deployed and start retrofitting a space. So we're getting cities asking us now to build more of these Better Blocks in a Boxes just for their cities, so they can go in and go retrofit their spaces and kind of move these things around. So that's I didn't want to take too much time there, so I guess.
Wow, Jason, thank you so much. It's so amazing what you're doing. I love what you said about, having to negotiate this on the ground. And I was in Chattanooga with you, helping build some of this furniture. And it's really interesting to see how, as you unpack it, move it around, experiment, you really design the space in real time, live, with whoever happens to be walking by or the friends that you invited. You showed me that, oh, I don't have my video on. You showed me that, for example, that these pieces are not glued together or nailed together. They actually have wiki joints that click them into place so they can be pulled apart, fastly reused. And it's just beautiful. I work in the local food movement too, so with urban gardeners and growers. And it really, the aesthetic that you create is the exact vibe that I think would entice them to think more about how they could open up a farm stand in a residential neighborhood and things like that. So it really blends that residential commercial feel, maybe starts getting people acting more like they're in a neighborhood than that they're in just some urban space that they might not feel as comfortable connecting with others and things like that. You did get a question in the box from Greg Reisman over in Portland, over at Portland Bureau of Transportation. And he was curious if you had any thoughts about big groups and big crowds, how maybe some of your thinking might apply to that as well.
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the big concerns. We did actually try an open streets movement in our own city before the Kansas City one, and it was pretty quickly shot down, understandably, over people's worries about gathering. Really at this point, the only thing that I've learned to be able to do is, we've developed kind of these stencils that say keep moving. We space the tables and chairs apart. We work with the other restaurateurs that actually have these and giving them kind of making sure that they have a checklist of cleaning these spaces, managing them. It behooves them to take care of them because it does extend their footprint. But beyond that, I've not had any instance where I've had a large crowd. Most everything I've been able to do is I've been able to spill out to the street and just take up more street space if I have to. If I see too many people coming in, just start grabbing more parking spaces.
Great. And also worth noting is, so people can actually, your designs are open source and they can print them online via a CNC machine and cut them out of wood. Like you said, a single piece of plywood for those market stands.
Yeah, so they're, part of the idea on Wikiblock was that we needed to, with the better block, like we had to rapidly retrofit a city block, which I learned after years of doing too many projects that's a lot larger space than I ever anticipated. And so I needed to be able to replicate things at scale rapidly. And so we got into digital fabrication because of that. So it's plywood. It's not made to be, permanent, although we do infuse dimensional lumbers into these that you would have seen like in the tables and chairs that aren't cut. So we try to get everyone to go and be able to buy their stuff from a Home Depot if they need to. And then they can go to a maker space and download the files. But everything we have that you saw there, outside of the Versailles planner, I'm still trying to design that, change a little bit of the design on that, but most everything else is available on the Wikiblock website to download.
Thanks so much. Thanks for everything you do. Madeline or Ethan, did you want to jump in on that? Otherwise, we'll go to Alex, who's our final presenter from Los Angeles. All right, they're saying, give me the red light, Alex. So,
all right. Welcome.
Please share us your perspectives, and thanks for being here.
Thanks, Ryan. I have some rudimentary slides I'll go ahead and share. If I can find my window, I think this is it. Do you all see that?
Yes, looking good.
Great. So thanks for having me today. I'm very inspired and impressed by the depth and expertise of my fellow conversationalists. And some of what I say will be, I think, redundant of some of the points Robin made in particular. There may be one slide that looks actually identical, but I promise I didn't steal it. I work for NeighborWorks America, and I support community development efforts throughout the country. And both in my role at NeighborWorks and also outside of it, I'm involved in various efforts around arts and culture and placemaking. And today I want to offer my observations more from a community and economic development perspective, and before some considerations moving forward as we explore this work. This is me back in February on one of my last work trips. I was already grossed out by flying, quite frankly. So a couple of days ago, my wife and I treated ourselves to a 4-course to-go tasting menu from a restaurant in our neighborhood. Clearly, we would have loved to have been able to do this outside, at a table with a drink in hand. Unfortunately, the reality for us is that we're having to stay at home. We're both considered high risk. Myself because of a pre-existing condition, my wife because she's pregnant, and we're cooking pretty much every meal and not rushing to eat out. This is a photo of one of the farms in the area that have shifted their operations to deliver to homes rather than relying on restaurants. And of course, across the country, people are dying, and more people are going to die because we've reopened too soon. And while there's been a flattening in some big cities like ours, in Los Angeles, places like Nogales, Arizona, on the border where we have family, are only now seeing an increase in the rate of infection. And as Robin articulated earlier, this is having a disparate impact on communities of color throughout the country, in terms of higher rates, in terms of taking on more risks as essential workers, in particular women of color, and who have to rely on our streets to get to work, and the economic impact is clearly uneven. And so the reality is that, as Elisa Walker argued in her recent piece on Curbed, this pandemic is revealing the failures of our cities. Not density, right? The argument's really not about, or there's an argument, but it's not really about density, but it's about disparity. So that said, there is clearly opportunity. This piece in the Atlantic explored how retail might be impacted, and that after a period where cities are essentially going to become more boring, where small businesses fail, people flee urban cores, chains grow, the shift to automation, including delivery, is accelerated, that after that, some cities, some neighborhoods may become more affordable, and that there may be opportunity there. Now, the question is, I think, who will be able to take advantage of this? And I offer as a case study the foreclosure crisis, which preceded the Great Recession, right? I started my work with NeighborWorks actually by coordinating foreclosure intervention efforts in the California Bay Area, in the San Francisco Bay Area, and in the California Central Valley. This here is a image of the Mexican Salvadorian bar and restaurant where my wife and I met in Echo Park in LA, before and after. Now the place is called Ostrich Farm. They don't sell any ostriches from what I can tell. But I offer this as a case study because what maybe at that time could have been seen as an opportunity for us to do a lot of good things, as things got more affordable, really just accelerated gentrification and displacement. And so my question is, what will happen this time? What will it take so that we don't fully take advantage of that opportunity to transform our cities in the way I think we would all hope to? Pretty much, I don't think we can unless there is some intentionality in our efforts. First and foremost, well, really, this is to echo what I think Robin articulated earlier, that we need an intentional strategy that directs investment to areas that are disparately impacted, And there needs to be real consideration on what kind of ecosystems of support exist, right, to support these small businesses at various levels. And that we need to mitigate the impact of closing streets and sidewalks on essential workers. So overall, I think we need a thoughtful, targeted, intentional approach. We also need to legalize and support what is already inherently outdoor dining, which is street vending. Either before or alongside any expansion of outdoor dining, I think. And in Los Angeles, where we outlawed street vending, we banned street vending as this pandemic begun. If we were to expand outdoor dining without reopening street vending, I think that would be a very clear form of discrimination. I want to offer a couple of case studies related to my role at NeighborWorks. We support organizations in both Chinatown, San Francisco, as well as Little Tokyo here in Los Angeles. Both are communities that have been severely impacted by this pandemic. And both are communities that are focused now on feeding seniors, essential workers, other vulnerable populations, and really engaging their local restaurants to do that, and subsidizing their local restaurants to provide meals to these folks. So that's where the focus is right now in these neighborhoods, to feed people who cannot safely leave their homes. And this is what the focus will be in the foreseeable future. So even if these neighborhoods are interested in exploring outdoor dining, they're really going to need extra resources and support to be able to do so. And last, I want to end with this quote from M. Scott Peck, actually, who wrote a self-help book that may be on your parents' bookshelf called The Road Less Traveled. He also wrote a book called The Different Drum, which was on a community. And this is a quote from him. And I essentially want to lead by saying that if a central tenet of placemaking is the value of community, we really have to genuinely care about all people. I'm just as eager as all of you to build this new world, but we can't forget to mourn, to accept who has been impacted and the depth of that impact, and let ourselves really be changed by what's happening. And that this just can't be an opportunity to do the things we were trying to do before, that won't be enough. Thank you.
Wow, thanks, Alex. You're an excellent speaker. I loved how you really brought that to a very human approach. And I like what you're saying about street vending and making sure that, it's not just a race for restaurants to commandeer public space, but it's a question of how does the community move out into the public realm in all forms. And I think it's important you brought up something that was mentioned in the article about modifications not negatively impacting essential workers. So if we're making it more difficult to the people who are already bearing the brunt of this experience for some experimentation, that's something, a harmful effect that we need to avoid and make sure that we're in touch with. All right, so we heard from California, Florida, New York. Really excellent to touch base. I know I learned several things that I'm going to be able to implement right away. I hope that many of the people who are watching learn from big cities, medium-sized practitioners. I think we're really a part of innovation, diffusion, and dissemination is a huge value of the network. Ethan or Madeline, I guess Ethan, why don't you jump in and if you could summarize maybe some of the things you heard or ways that we can move forward.
Yeah, gosh, thank you. What an incredible conversation. And this is so valuable. I think we'll definitely try to share this and and I want to watch it again. And there's so much to unpack from all of this. You know, we're all iterating and learning as we go. And you know, I think there's each part of each story, you know, has some major strengths and is trying to figure out some things too, right? So how we learn from each other, and how do we bring in new people to this conversation, both in the U.S. and globally. And so I'm eager to, you know, open to ideas and how to build on this conversation. You know, I'm curious, you know, what of these ideas are going to last, what shouldn't, you know, what should be kept temporary, what should be built on for deeper change. So I'm eager to have people keep evaluating this and maybe gather again in a month or two and start to ask those questions about what should be built on and which should slow down. You know, we do think that, you know, this whole idea of sort of informal and formal, you know, we've all gone inside our homes, we've gone into this private realm. We have to help remind people to step back out again, be part of their communities again, but in a new way, to make sure we do that more consciously and caringly. And as Alex said, we need to mourn. We need to realize that everyone's affected in so many different ways that we don't even realize ourselves in many cases. But this is an opportunity to reinvent and give back more. And so next week there's something called Porch Placemaking Week, which is a way to again reflect and organized by some Australian colleagues, co-design studio, and you can go to porchplacemakingweek.com and you'll see people are signing up all around the world to do some kinds of actions that are about coming back out of your storefront, your building, so I think many of these examples, you know, could be porch placemaking examples. And then, as I mentioned, on Thursday, we have this conversation with UN Habitat, many international organizations working in the Global South, on how to support informal communities and how to build on and respect the inherent placemaking qualities that they have, but obviously address the very urgent and, you know, systemic challenges that they're facing. But I think these conversations are very much connected, and you know, this is one of the beauties of this era, is that we're falling back in love with and appreciating what public spaces have done for us, how they've created our lives, but we're also connecting more globally, and where the barriers between us, you know, we realize are less, and it's a time to learn big and reimagine big together. So thanks for being part of this. And Madeline, did you want to add anything?
One of the intersectional pieces that I hear, and it was coming from Robin and also from, I'm sorry, the name of the last gentleman who spoke, Alex. Yeah. Is just really looking at how this dialogue about equity, like, in place works, because there's some very interesting, like just a second ago when we learned from our craftsman, our artist who's actually building, I think it's Jason Roberts, like when you're giving neighborhoods the ability to create their space and co-create, it's a very artistic and active activity that involves community. Whereas when somebody is saying that a person is being left out of a conversation, a lot of times the question isn't even being brought to them to like a problem posing question isn't being brought to them. I think that there's a lot of things that need to be kind of teased out in describing it, because I believe that one of the implementation factors of all of this is usually when we're thinking long terms about sustainability and about how to create a regenerative spaces and places, there's usually when you build, for instance, an ADA compliant sidewalk, that ADA compliant sidewalk isn't only for the person with the wheelchair. It also helps the mother with the stroller. It also helps the people who are just walking regularly, somebody who is blind. Like, so the thing is that I think that when we're thinking about sustainable measures, we're thinking about parklets and things, green spaces, that helps people who are stuck indoors and who have problems with space, where they need outdoor space to be part of their lives as much as everyone else. So I think that there needs to be a way to understand how, in a positive way, we can think about what we're doing as a part of that initiative and how that integration happens in a seamless way rather than it being something that polarizes community, because that ends up being a stop to actual work and implementation and things that we know that a multimodal city that has open spaces to walk and play and be more interactive are going to go towards. So I guess that's some of the things where that question is really important, and how it's done in this movement specifically is really important.
Mind if I chime in?
Yes.
Yeah, I want to say that there's a.
Does anyone else want to throw in any final thoughts on this conversation that we had and where we can go next?
I mean, I have a couple of thoughts, but I think Alex was trying to chime in on this last one.
Sorry, I had it muted, I think, or I couldn't hear. So Alex, please jump in. Yeah.
Oh, it's okay. I want to note that there are parallels with accessibility to racism, quite frankly, that eradicating racism benefits all of us, not just communities of color. And I think the beautiful thing about working in the public sphere and public space is that this is an approach that where everyone can have a role, right? And we can all work together and benefit from this. So I don't think this has to be polarizing at all. I think we can all win.
Thanks. And Alex, sorry about cutting off. I had my speakers down. But I think it was brought to my attention by BIDS Belgium, the Business Improvement District Belgium, that, sometimes you do ADA, like our city often says, like, 5 feet or whatever they say for wheelchairs, but you're just acting to code. And the code doesn't necessarily create an environment that's hospitable to the person that the code is there to serve, nor does it really take advantage of the opportunities. It's usually something that they reluctantly build around. And so really getting in touch with the active users and negotiating how to go beyond code to create something much more inclusive and exciting and dynamic is really exciting place for discussion. Cheryl, did you want to have some summary thoughts as well?
I mean, I just want to say a few things. This has been very interesting to see all the different projects. And I'm so happy that there's lots of us all around the world doing this at the same time. But I know with the years of doing this kind of work that there's no one-size-fits-all solution ever. And so in the different scales of what we're working with, it be economy, it be cultural scales. I mean, there's so many different factors we're working with. I know that there's certain solutions I can't bring into, like, let's say downtown West Palm Beach that would work in one of our smaller neighborhoods. So I really am looking forward to continuing this kind of conversation because when I see what we do with, dealing with equity and things like that and accessibility, we're very conscious right now of trying to employ we have a clean team that's employing people that are being taken off the streets. And so they step up into this job that they didn't have before. And we work with an organization that does that stepping up. And so there's so many complexities to the solutions that I think it would be great for us to focus on the strategies of change and the strategies of future or futuring. For myself, I use urban acupuncture. And so it's like we go into these little spots and make that amplify and let it radiate and let that thing morph. There's no perfection. I don't want a perfect city. I think that would be very boring. And I'm really, it's too bad what's going on right now. But this kind of pressure, I'm actually happy that it's making us almost have to act on what we've been thinking about for so long. So I would like to, for me, end in a happy note, because I know it every day bogs me down. It's very difficult. But I think with knowing that there's all these minds out there makes a positive outlook for all.
Beautiful. Anyone else want to help summarize and shut this down? Alan or Robin? Oh, I see, Alan, your lips are
I
moving.
was talking and can you hear me now?
Yes.
That's a great, maybe we should end on Cheryl's very optimistic note. I just want to thank you, Ryan and Ethan, for the conversation. I thought the various viewpoints were really what's important. And I love that conversation, whether it was from the public sector side or the business improvement side or the implementation side. Certainly Alex's comments were just really meaningful to me as well. So hearing that totality of different perspectives is really what's critical when we're talking about, you know, our shared community spaces.
So great. Thank you so much for joining us. All right, guys. Well, one more last call out, but I do want to shout out again to the Porch Placemaking Week, because I think, like what Ethan said, there's a lot of opportunity for non-commercial entities to learn a little bit about this public space activation through that lighter, quicker, cheaper opportunity coming up. It's an initiative led out of Australia, starts, I believe, May 31st through June 5th. And people all over the world are doing activations on their porches, their balconies, in the parking area or sidewalk in front of their houses. And they're looking at how anyone at any scale can do this. So it's a really perfectly timed opportunity to experiment beyond just the commercial sphere. We'll be in touch here to see how we want to evolve, if we want to come back together and dialogue more. We'll definitely connect everyone, or you can connect to the panelists who I think, I hope Jason Roberts got a few furniture orders out of this, maybe from like the city of Costa Mesa or something. And this was really useful. I just want to let you know that we've had conversations with cities that really want to move forward into this space. They want to do it right, and they're watching and learning from this conversation and going to make changes in their community. So hopefully we can report some of those actions back to you guys. So thank you so much for joining us. This was really fun and informative and helpful, and I look forward to spending more time with you guys in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan.
See you in Santa Ana.
Thank you, everyone. Much to build on here. We should do this again with vendors and focusing on informal workers in public space, and this continuum of how everyone can have an opportunity to shape and be part of the economy in public spaces.
Happy birthday, Ethan.
Thanks, guys. It's a good way to,
Ethan.
like, it'd be nice to be all in a streetery together, but this is the next best thing. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good one.
Okay.